today, and for some reason we were live streaming to that instead of this. Yeah. Good times.
Oh, something happened.
Good. Hey, there we are. I can see us. We are live. Perfect.
Oh, there we go. Going back in time.
Perfect. It's a process, but we worked through it. We got through it, and now we're live. So hello, everybody. I'm here today with Robin Vincent of Molten Modular Technology. The guy, I've been fascinated by his YouTube channel over the last couple months. I didn't realize, we were just talking off screen that we had met before, which I didn't know, and I've already apologized for that. But we're here today to talk about sort of the journey into modular, and from someone coming at, which is a really interesting angle, the sort of digital side of it and the computer-based electronics, and coming into analog modular and digital modular, but physical synthesis. I'm really interested in what he has to say about that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's cool to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Robin. And how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, all things considered. It's wonderful to be invited on here. Thanks so much, Richard, for your warm hospitality. It's good to be here. I love talking about this stuff. So, I hope people can sit back and write off the rest of the day as we sit here and muse over the wonders of these electronic boxes and bits and pieces. Yeah, it's great to be here.
It's strange times that we're living in right now, but it's and we were talking about this a little bit before I figured out how to get YouTube to stream properly. It's nice that we can do these live streams and sort of create and enjoy this wonderful community that we have and kind of all hang out together. So even though we're kind of isolated in our own little spots here, we can all congregate and talk about things that we love and maybe things that help us think about other things.
Yeah, I can see this is going to get deep really fast. Although, I think in many ways this is our natural habitat. We're the sort of people who are least affected by the isolationism that's going on at the moment, because that's kind of our vibe already in many ways. It's always great meeting people and getting together in real life.
Sure,
but
sure.
The majority of our time is spent in this form, I think. And what certainly something I really enjoy about live streaming is that opportunity to talk and connect to other people who are sitting around in their little places.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. It's healthy, I think.
Oh, it's absolutely healthy, and it's fun. It's because I know even I have my little I'm in my dining room, but I do have my modular setup in my dining room, and I've been I spend the evenings in here, and I'll put my headphones on, and I always considered it like meditation, where at the end of the night, I could put my headphones on and sort of make weird noises for a half hour or 45 minutes. And then at the end of the night, take off my headphones, and the day has kind of washed away all the craziness. I could just be like, okay, now I'm relaxed. I can go up and go to bed and start it all again tomorrow. But in the last few months, then sort of adding the streaming element to that, where I get to not only patch and make sort of weird sounds, but then engage and have great conversations with interesting people while I do it, has been super, super fun. Have you had, because you've been doing this obviously longer than I have, what's your experience with that type of thing?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that roll into it. I think some of it is bouncing off other people, bouncing off comments. From the things that people share, the things and ideas that people bring, and the questions that they have that give you an opportunity to talk about things that you hadn't perhaps expected. But there's also that element of performance in it, in that, at least I feel very aware that I'm on camera. And although I'm fairly relaxed about that now, it still adds an edge to things. So when I'm trying to make some music, I'm trying really hard to make some decent music, as opposed to just, whatever. I actually want to sound impressive. And I think that helps, because, we need encouragement to perform at our best, to create it. It's not something that just flows out of your fingertips, at least not in my experience. It needs a little bit more than that. And in a live stream situation, I feel pushed. I feel that I am absolutely trying to project my best self, and that, I think, is, people would rather see that than me just floundering around, picking my nose and messing about. So yeah, there's a definite edge to the idea of live streams. And there was something interesting you said there, actually, which will feed back perhaps onto the larger discussion, which is I would never come home from work and sit in front of my computer and make music to relax when I was a computer musician, because you'd be working on your computer all day, and the last thing you'd want to do when you get home was to turn on the computer again and then load up some software and then work out why that wasn't quite working, and then remember, because you unplugged that thing, and then you've got to plug that back in, and then you've got to find those drivers and then that update, and then you can start making music, perhaps. But the idea of sitting again in front of a computer is one of the things that I really started butting up against after doing it for so many years. Whereas sitting in front of a piece of equipment, some kind of external piece of hardware, is just a completely different experience. And so you're not dragging your baggage from work into your creative time, if you know what I mean. And that was, there's one of many factors, but that's one of the factors that really attracted me to looking outside the box. What was I doing in that box all that time?
Now I have the same story. I used to be a software developer myself, and I would write. I worked in like databases. It was terribly boring stuff, but I would write database software all day long, and then come home and open my laptop and open my DAW. And I was using Reason at the time, and I thought, even though it looked like a studio, it felt like I started calling it spreadsheet music. And I'm like, I'm using the same part of my brain to make music that I'm using at work. And there wasn't a satisfaction there. There was no sense of escape for me. So I bought a couple, some hardware synths and a couple things, and a Tascam Portastudio 388 reel-to-reel thing. I sort of went out of control on this. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to try to do this without computers, because for me, the enjoyable part is the process. The end result, I'm not that concerned with. So the idea that it didn't sound perfect, and it maybe that there was some tape noise, or I hadn't recorded it properly, or the song was just rubbish, really didn't matter to me. It was just the fact that for an hour or two every couple days, I could go downstairs and do this process. And to me, that was the part where I realized, oh no, this is it. It scratches a different part of my brain, and it really does let me escape my day to day.
Yeah, no, that's true. One of the other pitfalls that I encountered was the problem with preset surfing, whether I was surfing for kick drums or snare drums or a preset on a synthesizer, or then a preset on the mixing channel, and then a preset then on the compressor, and then another preset, trying to find something that would make everything sound good somehow. And then you would be chipping away at it. You'd have these endless lists of final mix 3, final mix 3.5, really, really final mix. And I found it impossible to finish anything. Not impossible necessarily, but things dragged out. And something which was a real revelation for me once I had a bit of modular together was that I had no way of saving it. I tried writing things down, I tried taking photographs, and in the end I just pulled out cables and thought, well, that's gone. And that's okay. And there's a point, I think, a bump you have to go over where we decide that that's okay, and suddenly you're free.
Yes.
It's like, really? That's okay. So I've just made a piece of music, I didn't record it, I just enjoyed it, and now it's gone. And that's all right. I mean, ideally, let's record it. Maybe I'll try and work that one out. But in the meantime, other than maybe a 30-second clip on Instagram, that's gone. And that's amazing. And I thoroughly love that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people get very frustrated and want to release stuff and do things properly in some kind of format. But For me, there's been some wonders that have come out of these bits of modular that I have that no one's ever going to hear. And as I say, I'm completely fine with that, and that has completely refreshed my attitude to creativity, the way I approach music, the importance of it somehow. It changes a lot of things. I could talk about for hours, I guess, how my perceptions have been changed simply by putting my hands on external gear.
It's sort of a special thing, because you would think, ultimately it's sort of a superfluous thing. You don't need a big hardware synthesizer to make music. Obviously you can do it with any laptop or any computer you could get anywhere. You could even go to the library and just log into the computer and make music that way. But there's something different. There's something about touching it and interacting with it. You feel like you're having a conversation with it, that you're making music with it. You're not telling it to make music. That I think that's sort of the wonder of modular, is that it's this ongoing conversation. And there's always sort of hidden little worlds to discover that, even me who, designs modular synthesizers for a living, once they're built and once I start to play around with them, the Voltage Lab's a good example of this. I find endless little worlds in there that I'm like, even though I have a fundamental understanding of how the circuitry works and why it's doing that, you can't process in your mind as you're sort of designing this stuff every possibility. So all this stuff they're just little magical boxes to me that I can just sit and I'm endlessly surprised and endlessly, you get those, like goosebumps. You hear a sound, you're like, oh wow, I can't believe it does that. It's such a visceral feeling and such a visceral sensation. Now for me, I very rarely do I perform live, and I don't really record anything. I do these little 1-minute videos for Instagram and YouTube. But other than that, really for me, it's that process of discovery and that process of learning it, because it's an ongoing learning tool that it's amazing to me. An example of sort of, as we're all learning, is I had, for some reason, until about a week ago, had never patched noise into the sync input of an oscillator. Never occurred to me to try that. And so I was doing a live stream last week and I patched it in. I'm like, oh, wait a second. This is amazing. It opened up a completely new, different world of synthesis. I'm like, I had no idea this existed. And now over the last week, that's all I've focused on. Everything I've done has that in it. I'm obsessed with this little trick that I've sort of stumbled upon. But it's given me endless excitement and endless happiness over the past week.
Well, I mean, in some ways that's both exciting, but it's also quite depressing, because I imagine that you're further down the road than I am, and I'm imagining that there's some place you get to in this journey, whereas, because I'm floundering, but in a good-hearted sense. But I hope to be a point where I actually know why I'm doing that, and I know what's going to happen when I plug that into that. So I keep pointing over here because my modular is just here that you can't see. What I want to hear from someone with your experience is this: oh, it's easy now. I just plug this in here and it makes this noise. Whereas it doesn't appear to be the case. So the fact that we're all learning and still on this journey, no matter where you are, I think is fascinating. Although I definitely meet people who believe they know everything in the course of this journey. And sometimes I get advice and comments from people that just don't make any sense. Don't make any sense to me. So there's always so much more that one can learn in this space, I think. And also, I mean, one of my experiences, I have numerous chips on my shoulders about all sorts of subjects, but one of them in particular is level of entry, barriers to entry.
Yeah.
How little worlds develop their own languages so that nobody else can actually get in there. I found that on places like Muffwiggler, and some of the I've got nothing against any of those sorts of forums and places, but they do have their own language, which is impenetrable if for someone starting out. And so I'm always looking to try to cut past that. So I'm not a believer that you need to have anything to start in this. You don't need a degree. You don't need to know engineering. You don't need to understand control voltage. Those are sorts of things you can discover on the journey, and that can be shocking for some people who believe it should be something which is very intellectual, something very thought through. But I love the fact that you can crash through it, and I have certainly crashed into it and continue to crash through it. And that, I hope I put that across in the videos that I do, that this is that sort of journey that I'm on, and that anyone could have a go, even if you get nowhere and you set it all on. But you can have a go. There's no reason why you can't.
No, just like anything else, if you're interested in it, you're gonna figure it out and you're gonna enjoy it. Because it's like a never-ending puzzle. You could solve the puzzle once, but as soon as you remove half of it, all those pieces change, and when you put it back together, you've created a new puzzle. That's what's fascinating to me is I've created all these bits and pieces, but every time I patch them together, it's different. And although I have some sort of basic patches that I go to as starting points where I'm like, okay, I know if I patch this up, I'm going to get this vibe and I can start there, but it never ends up being the same. And that's sort of the beauty of it, is that you can create these wonderful little worlds. And by adding then a different module, it changes everything, because then you're like, oh, well, I'm going to try this here, or I'm going to put this here. And that changes how I did this other thing. And it just sort of cascades down. And then you have, 100 different manufacturers putting their spin on what your rack is to them and how you interact with it. And then you have the individual users saying, okay, out of these 100 manufacturers, I'm going to pick and choose the pieces that I think are interesting to me. What you have here is you have a community of people we all have the same basic love, but we're all working it completely differently and from sort of different angles. But I think what we found is people can come together and share their experiences, and everyone gets excited about it in their own way.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's true. It can be a very individual response that people have to this sort of thing. I mean, I remember. I don't know. I mean, I remember seeing this back in the 90s at Music Meta. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when the super booth first came about, not the show, but the super booth, the booth within the booth of Music Meta.
Yes,
it was just kind of this spaceship of silver and lights, because it was all dope fur. Mm-hmm. And thinking, I don't care, where are the plugins? I was seeking out new bits of software. I was seeking, because that was cutting edge, man. The end of the 90s, I was all over the computer side of things, and that was my area. That's what I was doing at the time through the music shop that I worked in, Turnkey in London. I was the person running the computer music department, the PC music side, excuse me, not the Macintosh side, which was dealt with by all the really intelligent, clever people. Whereas I had to deal with all the crazy people on the shop floor, who would come in looking for an M1 D1 interface for their joystick on their computer. So I was dealing with all that. And so all of these flashing lights and these weird stuff was of zero interest. And I find it fascinating looking back why none of that appealed. I mean, I played on synthesizers. I also looked after some of the synths in the shop, and there's a lot of stuff there, but it was largely digital, lots of workstations and bits and pieces. And I can't quite work out why I was not intrigued. I had no interest, zero interest in it at all. And it's interesting how the journey starts and what it is that starts attracting you to the idea of it. I can't quite work it out. I still can't believe that I gave it no interest. It's like, what on earth was I thinking? Well, there you go. I don't know where that came from.
Well, I know a lot of the instruments back then, the synthesizers, most of them at that point were digital, and I'm a big fan of digital synthesizers. But what I'm not a huge fan of is sort of menu diving and all that. I don't have the patience for it. And back then, I was working and I only had so much time to use this stuff. So it seemed like every time I would learn how to use something, by the time I had time to do it again, I'd have to relearn it. So I sort of fell into, well, if I'm going to use hardware, it's got to be just about one knob per function so that every time I see it, I'm going to remember what I did the last time so I understand how to use this thing. And so for me, that was a big deal. So I stuck with, back then, I stuck with simpler drum machines and simpler synthesizers. Like in our band, we had a Juno 106, and we had, although we did have a Yamaha DX5, I want to say, DX, something like that. But that one, if it had presets, I was just going to pick presets. I never really dove beyond that because I felt like, that's sort of a special world. The 106 was different though, because it had all the sliders, and so it's kind of invited you in, saying, no, just grab a slider and move it. The user interface really guided you as to what to do. Well, if there's a slider, obviously they want me to slide it. And I think that led me down to the older than analog stuff, sort of the vintage stuff. And then once we had this new analog resurgence, it led me into that and into Eurorack, because I'm like, well, the knobs are there because they want me to touch them. It seems like it's way more inviting than something like a Triton, or where it's like, oh my, how does this thing work? This is more complicated than the software I'm using. So I've always sort of stayed on the side of, it's got to be easy, and there's got to be some sort of interaction and some sort of conversation. Otherwise, I would just use a preset plugin. I'm not sure. That's to me the world I came from. But I also came, I'm not a keyboard player. I play with, two fingers, and I'll do arpeggios, or I'll do tap in a sequence, because as a drummer, I don't really have the chops to play with a piano or anything. So that side of it, I was never really interested in. How good does this piano sound to me? Because it didn't matter. I wasn't going to be able to play it with any ability anyway. So I was always looking for, let's make the weirdest sound that we can make, and let's make how can we have this drone on all the time? So all my keyboards had broken keys because I would jam guitar cables in between the keys to get them to just drone on endlessly.
Yeah, no, I've certainly done that. I think, another thing that's interesting, in fact, in some ways it pulls it over from the computer world, is that in computers, there's always the argument over that you don't need to have any talent, because all you can do, you just drop loops in, and you can drop this, that, and the other in, and it all does it for you automatically. And actually, there's elements of that in Eurorack, but in a positive way, in that you don't need to be able to play, as you say, you don't need to be able to play an instrument in order to access Eurorack. You can just randomly push a few sliders in order to get a bunch of notes, and those notes sound, and then you start playing with the sound. And you don't have to understand that musically. You don't have to know what intervals you're using. You don't have to quantize. You don't have to do anything musical. You are just sort of shaping and crafting sound, moving things purely based on what it sounds like to you. And that again is incredibly freeing. It's rather than being tied to either a keyboard paradigm where you have to understand and play an instrument, you're suddenly free to just explore sound in that way. So again, low entry level, no barriers to entry. You don't have to understand intervals or voltages to do it. I mean, the whole 1 volt per octave thing had me scratching my head for ages. What do they 1 volt? What does that mean? And these are simple terms. All you need is someone to explain it to you. But nobody was explaining these things. That was really where my vibe came from. I mean, this was my first introduction to it, other than in the past when I ignored it, was Synthfest in 2016. I think. And I went along because I'd just taken on the role as synthesizer correspondent for gearnews.com, who I write for. And I'd started off with them writing about software synths and sound cards and audio interfaces. And then they needed someone to write about hardware synths, and they seemed to think that I'd be good at that because I wrote about software synths. And there's a huge gap between those two things, I would say. But I thought, oh, all right, I'll give that a go. And so this show came up, and I went up to Sheffield and had a poke around and met my first bits of Eurorack. And what I discovered is that, I mean, I sat through a lecture about it, a lecture, seminar, whatever it was, and I didn't really understand a word. And I'm an intelligent guy, you know, I've got degrees and things, and, you know, I've worked in the music industry for a long time, and I'm sitting there scratching my chin going, oh, I don't have any clue what they're talking about. And yet this is really interesting. And then I had a couple of conversations with people who were showing their stuff, and that was interesting, but also mind-blowing. But there was one woman called Eden Gray who I spoke to, and she was just chatting to me about, I don't know, can't remember even what it is, but as she was talking, she was just moving knobs and fiddling, and this amazing sound was coming out. And I was just completely fascinated. She didn't tell me anything about it particularly. It was just kept on making and changing and evolving. And I thought this was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I still don't understand any of it. And so it was from that point that I then sort of got home. After, I mean, I had intended to buy something like a Mother 32 or a No Coast. They were the two things I'd looked at, or an Erebus. They were the three little synths I thought, okay, I better get myself a synth kind of thing. And I sort of put that on hold and nosedived into the Eurorack. And I could not find sensible information, nothing at my level, nothing that would tell me exactly what everything was. I was constantly being directed to Muff Wigglers and Learning Modular, Chris Meyer, and DivKid, and, you know, other videos and bits and pieces. And they were all helpful to a degree, but there were just fundamental bits that I could not get hold of and grasp. And I don't think I would have done had I not thought, sod it, I'm just going to get some and see what happens. So that it was through that experience, I think, that I really felt that there was room for someone like myself who could write a bit and could make content. 'Cause I'd already been doing videos on audio interfaces and software. So someone who could present what this stuff was about at a level that other people could understand, that non-techie, nerdy people could understand. And so that's kind of where I felt I could find a niche in there, and that would seem to be an interesting journey. And it certainly has been. I can't believe that's nearly 4 years. It's been fun to watch you make the journey too, as I've been taking a deep dive into your YouTube channel and watching. It's interesting. I love sort of finding new creators on YouTube, and, you know, because you're introduced to them from their latest videos, or, you know, within the last couple months videos. But then as you start to get interested in them, you start taking a deep dive and you go backwards. And it's sort of strange watching a person devolve as it goes back. But it's very interesting. So it's sort of been interesting to watch your system shrink over the last couple of weeks. But so my question is, and I haven't made it back to the very beginning of you getting into this, what was your first module or group of modules, and how did you decide that those were the modules to start with? Excellent question. And it was a question that I asked everybody to start with. So I ended up buying a Mother 32 because I thought that that's a good way in. I can start off with that. It's a synthesizer, subtractive synthesizer. I did actually already have a Base Station 2 from way back. So, you know, I understood that kind of level of stuff, and this had patch holes in it. So I thought I could start patching stuff. Although I don't think I ever really did, thinking about it. Never mind. So then what I did is that I sat down and Googled it and researched it as much as I could to try to work out what I should do. And then I emailed everybody I could find. So every company, you know, yourselves, Dopefer, who else is there? There's more than that, isn't it? Make Noise.
No, I'm pretty sure that's it. There's just...
And so I emailed everybody and just said, oh, I'm just starting out in modular. what would you recommend from your range of stuff to have? Then I emailed a bunch of shops like Mattech Modular and Cymru Beats and other places around the place. Toman even I did, saying, what would you recommend for a little starting up thing? And then emailed a few individuals as well, but some people just asking. I knew Alex a little bit at Source Distribution. They do Moog, and so I asked him, not knowing at that time that he was Mylar Melodies, and so knew a thing or two about modular. I just said, you don't suppose you happen to know anything about this modular business? Like an idiot. Anyway, so I emailed a whole bunch of people, and I got a very interesting range of replies back. None of it was necessarily helpful overall, but it did start to open up some ideas and thoughts for me. And 90% on the whole were really, really nice. I mean, I got an email back from Dieter Doepfer. I had no idea who this guy was at the time, but time and time again, I was contacted by the owner of that company saying, oh yeah, do this and try that. Mm-hmm. And so that was extremely interesting. You wouldn't get, I'd never email Korg and expect Mr. Korg to email me back. That sort of thing just doesn't happen. So that was fascinating to start with, either how small or how close or how communicative everybody was and how pleased they were to be asked. Mm-hmm. I think I got a reply from 4MS who just said, oh, Google it. And that was all they said. But other than them, I think it was all largely very, very positive. And so I think perhaps the best advice I got was to get something different to what you already have. So I had a Mother 32. That was my starting point. So I already had a subtractive synthesizer, essentially. So it would probably be an interesting process to model that in Eurorack. Just that synth voice idea, but also get another sound that sounded different, that gave a completely different texture. So a wavetable oscillator or something of that nature. And I understood the difference between an analog oscillator and a wavetable oscillator. I understand synthesizers, but what I discovered is that I don't understand how the signal flow within a synthesizer actually works. It had never occurred to me that what happens to the sound from this bit to that bit, what this does and what those things do. I know what those knobs do, and I know that the knob is labeled ADSR, or it's labeled envelope, or it's labeled this, that, and the other. And I know that moving those things has an effect, but I have no idea how that's wired together, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So when starting with the first few modules of Eurorack, I tried to think of it along the lines of a synthesizer. So I needed an oscillator. I needed a filter. That much I knew. All right. I didn't know I needed a VCA. I had no idea what that was for. I just assumed that's what beefed up the output.
Yeah.
I needed an envelope, but I didn't know how to wire that in. Is that it?
That's all you need.
That's kind of all you need. And I knew I needed something interesting. So something interesting to me, which I didn't understand, would be something like maths.
Okay.
So I think I got, what was the first? See, I'd have to look at my own video now. I think I got an STO. I think I got an STO, make noise oscillator.
That's what the comments are saying that you got.
Oh, right. See, they know better. The filter, it wasn't the Jove, which was my favorite one. Oh, I got the Polyvox filter from Erica Synths.
Oh yeah, that's a great filter.
Yeah. Well, see, I thought I knew and understood filters, and I realized that I didn't once I got that particular filter. That's become better later. It wasn't better to start with. It was one of those. Anyway, I'll get to that in a moment. I think. I did get a VCA, which I got the Veils, 4 channels of VCA, because everyone said you need lots of them. So I thought I better get 4. That sounds like a good idea. And I got the maths, and I got a Z4000 envelope, I think it was, which I hated. I hate that envelope. And yeah, I think that was it. I think that was probably my starting point. Oh, and then for the digital different sound, I got the Erica Synths wavetable. Yeah, the black wavetable.
Oh,
Which is,
okay.
I heard a guy do a demo of that through a really nice reverb, and it, just very gently changing the waveform,
Mm-hmm.
just sounds beautiful. Because I don't like wavetables in as much as to play them on a keyboard. It's always very tinny and sharp to me. I like an analog sound, but the movement of wavetables is really nice. That's something that I can relate to. So yeah, so I had my Mother 32, and next to that I had this one synth voice, oscillator filter, this VCA thing, an envelope that I couldn't patch in, and maths, which I had no clue what to do with. So that was my mind-boggling starting point. And you plug it together for the first time, and it sounds crap. It's just one note. And I don't know how to play the note. I've got nothing to play the note with. All I can do is turn the knob. So all I've got is a signal generator, like what we had at school. And it's like, oh, gee whiz. And I've spent all this money and I'm expecting it to sound awesome. And it doesn't. And it's like, oh, no. And then you start, okay, settle down. Let's put it through the filter, the filter. That's not really doing anything. Well, I mean, to start with, I'm probably using a sine wave to start with, which hasn't got a whole lot to filter in the first place.
No.
So, and then I'm putting it through a Polyvox filter, which I don't really understand, because I'm expecting it to sound like the sort of filters I recognize, like a nice Roland filter or an SH101 filter, something which has that level of musicality to it. Whereas a Polyvox filter is just does horrible things to your sound. It goes, ugh. And I wasn't really expecting that, and I couldn't find those sweet musical points. I'm just going, oh, this is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
This is terrible. So, yeah, it didn't start well, I should say. I don't know. I don't necessarily think I made any wrong decisions necessarily. It's just that there is a learning curve. There is a point, I think, where you sit back and go, what have I done? This is not. Yeah. I shouldn't have even started. This is crazy. But what I found is once I started playing with the maths, although I had no clue what it was supposed to do, I could work out rise and fall envelopes. I could work that out. I had an attack and nerd decay. That was fine. But I still needed something to trigger things with. Oh yeah, I had the Mother 32, so I could take the sequencer out of that. That started to make some notes rather than just a single tone. So that was good. And I could then start patching the maths into things to wobble stuff about. And that seemed to make some kind of sense. And then suddenly I was getting a little bit of movement. And once you get movement, then things start to open up, I think. Because you can then start wanging the filter around, you can start moving the wavetable sound around, and then you start getting a slight flavor that something could happen here, that there is something. And then the other thing I got was a Batumi 4-channel LFO, and that was fantastic. That was a really good
yes,
because I could use 4 sine waves to move stuff all over the place, and I could start moving the maths, which then moved something else, and it's then that it started to sound like something modular, something different to the Mother 32 and other different to software synths. It started to do a bit of bubbling. I loved the way that you could just sort of do that speeding up thing. Really good description there, where I've got a slow LFO that's speeding up the rise and fall on the maths.
Yeah.
So you got this ding 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 ding, that kind of effect going on, and that was brilliant. That sounded like I'm making like electronic music, and so things like that were very pleasing. And then I think what's key to sticking at it is that you need to go through a whole bunch of quick victories. So if you can find something, that then starts to work, that then steps you onto something else that works, that then steps you onto something else that works. If you have just a little series of successes, I think it's that point that it hooks you. And you go, yeah, right, this is awesome. I can do this. You still haven't understood anything. I still don't understand how any of it works. I still haven't got to my story about envelopes yet, but it's starting to open up. And that's when it starts to get interesting, and that's when you get into buying and selling modules because you're not quite sure what it is you're supposed to have next.
Yes. Well, we always recommend for people that, because we get question asked all the time, how should I start? And we always recommend our SV1, but then I say, use that because, and the only reason I recommend that, honestly, is that it has a manual and it has patch examples. So I say, go through the patch. I know no one likes to read a manual when they buy these things because you want to, use this stuff and you want to feel smart. And you want to feel like you know what you're doing. I say, but you know what? Read the manual, do the patch examples, and then go from there because it gives us an opportunity then to walk through, because this is one of the rare opportunities in Eurorack when we know that we know what they have, and we can then help them. Once their system grows sort of beyond the walled garden of this one little instrument, it's kind of hard for us then to give, tech support, so to speak, and sort of guide them along their journey. They're kind of on their own. So that's what I always say. And then I say, okay, once you're comfortable with this and and they say, well, what am I going to have to buy next? What am I going to buy next? And I'm like, you'll kind of know what you want to buy next when you get there. So with the SV1, for example, I always recommend, well, maybe you're going to want more modulation. So you're going to want a function generator, or you're going to want some LFOs, or maybe because it's, it's a monosynth essentially, but it only has one ADSR. So I'm like, well, you may want to get another ADSR, or, go filter. But at that point, one step at a time is definitely what I always recommend. And I say, don't do it all at once either, because this stuff is complicated and it's deep. And if you start with a small system and you force yourself to use that small system and I think there's this sense in Eurorack that if you buy a case, it has to be full or you're not doing it right. Where the reality is, you can entertain yourself and you can do interesting things with 3 or 4 modules. It's not a problem. So you sort of have to fight that gear acquisition syndrome and say, you know what, I have enough here to learn. And most of the time, until you really feel strongly that, okay, I understand what I'm needing, once you get to that point, you're going to say, okay, now I know what I want to add because I have an understanding of what I'm doing here, and this is the direction I'd like to go in. That's what I would sort of recommend for people getting in. Now, how many people follow that advice? I would say probably very few. And I know when I got into modular synthesis, I certainly didn't follow that advice. I got in the synthesizers.com side of it. So I went in on the 5U side. They had come out with a system that was, you pay a monthly amount, like $100 a month, and over the course of 12 months, then you end up with a full system.
Wow.
And I thought that's great. But the problem with that is I realized immediately after I did it was the first month you pay, you don't get anything. Then the second month you pay, they send you the case. Yeah. So you're like 3 months in before then they send you an oscillator. Like, well, you really can't do anything with just an oscillator. So I ended up just, you know what, I'm going to buy all of it all at once. So I sent them all the rest of the money and got this thing at once. And I just stared at it. It was in there and I had to Google like synthesizers.com starter patch examples because like you, I understood the synthesizers I was using, but I didn't know necessarily what each thing did. I didn't realize, just like you, that a VCA is what turns the sound off. It never occurred to me that an oscillator makes sound all the time. And it never occurred to me that you don't patch audio through an envelope generator. I thought that's what you did. So I think we're all in the same boat. And I think I think your stories are very relatable because we've all been there and we've all had those same experiences. When you learn this stuff, it seems like we're all going down different roads, but ultimately we're all along the same path. We're at different points on it, but we're all kind of along the same journey.
Yeah, that's amazing hearing you say that, because that makes me feel not quite such a dunderhead, because I mean there's this massive disconnect when you lose the keyboard, because it's the switch. That switch is doing a whole stack of stuff in a little synthesizer, or is it? No, probably, I don't know. But so you are, or one is tied into that idea that there's no sound. I hit a key, sound emerges. And that's not true. That's not true. The sound's already there. It's always there. And in fact, you've got to work quite hard to make to make it feel like turning something on and off, because the sound's always there. How on earth do I get it to shut up? That becomes your next thing. And as and you patch your oscillator through the envelope and wonder why this is not working, because the envelope surely squeezes, and doesn't it do that? But as you say, it's actually turning a knob on your VCA. That's just crazy. You're turning it up and down. Of course you are. I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, but it's not until you have to make that happen that those sorts of things start to become clear, let alone using envelopes for other things. I don't know. I think that's always boggled me a little bit. I enjoy a sine wave LFO very much. I like that. I understand it. I can watch it happen. Using an envelope in the same way, I still don't quite, because you have this up and then you got to, and then because it doesn't fulfill that flow, if you know what I mean. It has a different shape, and I guess that's the same with any sort of different shaped LFO. And that's not something I'm yet to connect, I think, with that less symmetrical way of looking at things, I suppose.
So again, there's a whole world of non-geometric synthesis out there for you to discover.
Yeah, there is. But things have to be easy, you see. I mean,
Sure.
I suffer occasionally from purchasing a module that is just too hard. And so then I don't connect with it. I mean, I'm looking at you, Bloom, sitting here. I've got the Qubit Bloom, because also I want to feel like I've come far enough to understand a complicated module. You kind of feel like I want to upgrade now. I want to, I can handle it. I can handle it. So every now and again, I buy something a bit overly complex, So I bought the Qubit Bloom. I mean, I love Qubit's modules. They always look fantastic. They always explain them badly, and I always feel that there's room in there for me to make some really interesting videos about their really interesting modules that don't seem to make any sense. So I thought, right, because they never send anything out either. I've asked you a few times, and they go, no, we're not sending you anything. So I thought, sod it, I'll buy one. So I bought the Bloom because I'm very much into melody, and I liked the idea of that. And I can't get beneath the front. I can't get beneath the surface at the moment. It's looking at there. It's looking at me. It's giving me lots of nice lights, and I can't work it out. But I think I'm going to persevere with that one. That one's not going to go on the bad pile. But there's other things, like the classic one is clouds. I bought a clouds because I felt I was supposed to, and at the time I bought it, I think Emily was talking about discontinuing it. So I thought, well, if I'm going to get one, I better get one now.
Okay.
So I got one, stuck it in my rack, and it frustrated me for about 6 months before I sold it, before I was going to break it, because I just could not get the sound from it that I felt was promised. I felt that that it came with this baggage that I should be able to instantly create ambient soundscapes. And I got sort of crushed sounds. I got a reverb. Yeah, all right, now reverb's nice, but I got a better reverb over here. So I didn't really need it for that reverb. And I would turn the knobs, I would modulate it, I would put things in it and take it out again, going, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't make it make the sort of sound I'm expecting it to make. And and those things can get very frustrating. But I knew that it was something that I was supposed to have. And there is a bit of that. There's a few of those things. It's like, for instance, maths is no longer in my rack. It's over there on the shelf. And that's not because it's not a good module. It's just that I don't have any use for it anymore. And I'm sure it has deep. I mean, I've seen some great patches they do on Instagram when Make Noise put these little 1-minute patches together, where they've got it all patched into itself, and it does something fascinating. But I have no idea how to replicate that. I'd have no idea how to start to replicate that. So it's found its way out of my rig, because other than using the Rise and Fall envelopes, but I have other things which do that better now. So I don't actually need it for that anymore. So it's just found its way out of the rack. But it's almost a bit like the idea of being able to not save a patch. The idea that you make your music and then it's gone. With some modules, you might enjoy them for a bit or not, and then it's okay to let them go. You don't have to leave redundant modules in your rack, I don't think. And I quite like the healthy secondhand market idea, because I think most people grasp that. There's no point sweating over a module if it's not rewarding you, if it's not giving you joy. Move it on, and that's okay. That's okay to do that, and it's okay to admit that you can't get maths and clouds to work, even though that's what everyone's supposed to have to start with.
I think there is in the world of Eurorack, there is a list of modules that people assume that I have to have this because that's the thing that everyone says you need. But the maths is it's a surge circuit from back. There's 10 different companies doing their version of it. Some of them do different things than others. Maths caught on because at the time it was sort of this. It really filled a need in the Eurorack space that didn't exist. When Tony came out with that module, it was amazing because it did something that Eurorack desperately needed. But now I think you would be hard pressed to find any module in Eurorack that is desperately needed, because there's so many versions of so many ways to approach things that, if one particular module isn't doing it for you, there's other versions and other ways to do it. I've always had a sort of a strange relationship with function generators and slope generators in general. I think what they do a lot of things, which is why people gravitate towards them, certainly when they get into modular, that, I can get this module and it does 20 different things. And yes, that's true. But just like any sort of multi-purpose tool, it may be 20 different things, but it doesn't do any of them particularly well. So it's an oscillator, but it's not a really good oscillator. And it's an LFO, but it's sort of finicky to work with, the rise and the fall separately. And it's a slew generator, and I guess it does slew, but it doesn't do it amazingly well. And it's a clock divider. Well, yeah, if you set it perfectly, you can do clock divisions. And so, and I'm not, this is a general thing for the slew circuit in general. It's not any particular module. And so for me, as I've always sort of strayed away from for a long time, because I always found, if an envelope generator to me, an ADSR just sounds more musical. So that's what I've always sort of gravitated towards. It wasn't until we did the Voltage Lab, and the context of the Voltage Lab really did require slew circuits and function generators, that I sat down and I was like, okay, how can I, understanding the limitations of what this thing can do, how can I make it as musical as I can within the context of this instrument? And that's when it sort of really opened up to me that, okay, there is some sort of magic in this circuit that Serge developed all those years ago, but it's magical within the context of how you use it. The function generators in the Voltage Lab are no more or less usable than, say, the ones in the maths. They have the same limitations and they have the same feature set essentially, because we're all building off of those original Surge circuits. But it's the context that you use them within, and it's how they're used. If you're going for that truly West Coast sound, you sort of celebrate those quirks, just like the Minimoog. To change the module completely, but to sort of emphasize what I'm trying to get across is, if you go to like the Minimoog filter, that classic Minimoog filter sound is amazing, but when you sweep it, you lose all the low end. So, you could argue that, well, it's gone, but there's something about it that you kind of need, because it sort of hits you in that special spot. And I think there's a ton of modules like that you can approach this same way of doing things in 10 different angles. And if one module from one company doesn't scratch the itch for you properly, that doesn't mean that necessarily that bit of technology isn't it. It's just maybe that company's approach to it isn't, you're not getting along with that. And it's not a knock on the company. It's not a knock on the person. It's just, there's so many ways to approach this stuff. And that's kind of the magic of modular, is you can dip in and say, you know what, I like this, and I don't really like how they approach this, but I really like how they do their oscillators, and kind of pick and choose and build this instrument that's perfect for you.
Yeah, but you've also got to you've also got a risk as well, I think, in as much as you don't have to buy a module with a pure intention, because sometimes something just looks nice is one, as in, oh wow, that's got a nice front panel, I wonder what that does. Or you might stumble into something by accident, or you not actually know what it is that you need until you kind of have it. I mean, for me, in some ways, the Disting is a good example of that, in that I could not work out what it was, where to go next, what to do after I had my basic synth voice. And so it was recommended time and time again to get the Expert Sleeper's Disting, because it has 50 modules inside it, which I didn't quite understand. Now, I don't love it as a module, but it's extraordinarily useful in just trying out a few things. So when you talk about slew, that's another mysterious concept when coming to this from synthesizers. I guess that's sort of portamento / envelope kind of glide sort of thing. I don't know. So
sure. So you've got it perfect.
Yeah, but see, that's the sort of thing you can try out with the Disting. Creating. I did something. What did I do? Was it sample and hold? I was trying to make work, trying to understand that. I mean, sample and hold. I mean, my first synthesizer experience was on a DX100. I had a DX100 when I was a kid, and that had sample and hold in it, which to me just equals random. That's all it does. You press that key down, it goes, that sort of sound, and that's what sample and hold is. I had no idea that it actually sampled anything and then held on to it. I mean, I know it's in the title and all that, but my reality of sample and hold was that it was a random function, and so I was able to recreate getting a piece of noise from somewhere and getting a sample and hold circuit out of the Disting and actually making that work, making that happen, and understanding that. And so something like the Disting is awesome for that. It's terrible to use as a performance tool or as an actual module. It's awful. But to learn about something and then go and buying the proper version of it, it's indispensable for that kind of thing. I know there was a reason for why I was talking about that. I can't think what that is now, but it doesn't matter. But there was another example. I had another example over here. Look, no, you can't see. But we're talking about envelopes as we were a little while ago.
Yes, back to the envelopes.
The envelopes, but it's with a slight spin on it. I got hold of this quantizer from a company called Tenderfoot, which was brilliant. And we've had conversations before. I did a review of his Lattice sequencer, great bits and pieces. Really, we seem to be on very similar wavelengths in that every module he produces seems to be exactly what I've been looking for. So but anyway, so I bought this quad quantizer, and he put a couple of other little modules that he'd also been doing in the box for me to try out, which is very nice. One of them is called Pinhul. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but it looks nice. I've put it in the rack, and I've no idea what it is. And so I was doing some live stream, or I did a few performances online, and someone said, "Why don't you use those low pass gates?" I'm going, "What?" He says, yeah, if you put it through the low pass gate, then you'll get that sort of sound that you've been running on about that you can't seem to get with your envelope. I'm going, I don't have any low pass gates. What are you talking about? He says, no, that module there is a whole bunch of low pass gates. Oh, right, really, is it? And so I plugged this in just the other day, and it's exactly what I've been looking for ages. I mean, it's got no controls on it. You just plug something in, something out, and a trigger, and it makes a short sound. And it sounds nice. It's like fantastic. You see, I didn't even know I had it. And so sometimes it's not just the accidents of patching something; it's the accidental purchases or acquiring of a module that you don't necessarily even know what it's going to do until either somebody points it out or you see another video that shows you what it can do. And that's part of this. It's a growing mystery. It's not. I mean, certainly for me, none of this or little. A few bits of this have been really intentional. Most of it has been a gut reaction or a moment of inspiration, or just I need to spend some money. I've got to get a flipping module. It's going to be this one. Or I mean, for someone in my position, I'm lucky enough to be sent the odd module from time to time, and so I have something that I wasn't thinking of,
Hmm.
and get the opportunity to try that out. So when it comes to building your instrument, that is part of the creativity of modular is in the acquisition of those modules. Those are creative acts in of themselves, if you like, because it's not. I haven't got a list or a plan. It's like sometimes you're trying to solve a problem. Sometimes you just want something that's pretty, that sits there, and you're going to work out what it does later. And that's amazing. That's just I don't know. Maybe it's madness. Maybe it's just completely nuts. Maybe it's the equivalent of buying every box set of plugins in the hope that one of them will be good. But I think to flip that is just to say that because it's so compressed, because you physically don't have the room, you don't have the room with the money either,
Hmm.
that you're always going to have this massive amount of restrictions, which means, I think, that you're not really running into that I've got hundreds of presets problem, because there's a limited amount of space. You're always restricting yourself. You're always limiting yourself, which gives you enough space to play in without being overwhelmed, I think, by it.
No, I agree with that entirely. I'm a big fan of give me a small case with fewer modules in it and let me just play in that little sandbox and let
Yeah.
me explore that. I have a larger case here at home that I use for live streams, and the only reason I have this larger case at my house is because the case itself is approximately 16 by 9 in size, so it fits. The camera lines up on it really well. But other than that, I have a smaller system at home because I like the limitation, and to have this. I'm not trying to make 5 or 6 sounds at once to do a full show. I usually I focus on one sound and sort of poke around with it, and then I move on to a different sound. And to me, I can get lost in the sort of spaghetti of the cables once you have a ton of sounds going, and you start to lose track of what did what. And certainly when I'm doing live streams and someone will ask, hey, what's making that weird beepy noisy sound? And I'll be, oh, I think that's this. And then I have to, well, how did I make that again? I have to follow the cables back and be like, it was this oscillator over here that did that. And this is why it's doing it. But it's much easier to say, oh, here's just this patch, this one little thing that I'm doing. But people don't, in your rack, it doesn't seem like people stop with, here's my small system. It seems like if you get into it, you say, okay, here's my small case that I'm going to buy, and this is going to be perfect. And then they get another small case, and then they get rid of those, and they get a bigger case, and then a second big case to put next to it. And I guess that sort of speaks to the way that your rack kind of opens up your imagination a little bit, in the same way that it is a mystery every time you turn it on. But I think the people that dig it are the ones that are up for the challenge, and they don't want maybe they're not, if typically they're not a player, so to speak, or if they are a player, they're equally interested in sort of the generation behind it and the sound design behind it. And this little magical box that they've created, gives them sort of this endless world of sound design.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, money is obviously a factor. I think it's something which you can't ignore, unfortunately. But again, it's a limiting factor, and I've found, moving from a computer which seemingly is unlimited in what it could achieve and what it could do, it's that froze my creativity. I couldn't cope with the fact that I could do anything. It was constantly a blank page, and it remained blank because I couldn't think what the heck to do. Whereas moving to the hardware, where I've only got a few choices, you have to go with that choice, and you start off with that. I'm starting off with that square wave again, and I'm going to see where I'm going to take it this time. I'd never do that on a computer. You'd start off, well, I've got this Omnisphere patch, I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to add 5 more of those, and then drop in 1,000 loops and see where it takes me. And you wouldn't see where it takes you. You'd get bored and you'd go on Facebook and you'd go and do something else. So yeah, it's that. So yeah, money was, I was wanted to mention a little bit of. In one of the things that I've found to get around it is to go the kit and the DIY route, which is not as cheap as you'd like to think. I think perhaps. But it does shave off a little bit, and it does also fill up a bit of time so that you're not constantly thinking of the next module. It allows you to spend some time focusing on one thing, which is also good. And it brings in this sort of extra dimension where not only are you putting together your own instrument with modules, but you're starting to make the modules that do that. And that's amazing. And again, with my barriers to entry thing, you don't have to know anything about soldering to start making your first kit. I mean, okay, you might need to buy a soldering iron, but that's not hard, and as long as you don't think about it too much, you won't go down the rabbit hole of arguments over what type of solder to have, or whether you've got a flux pen or a flux this or a flux whatever the heck that is. Just buy a $10 Amazon soldering beginners kit, buy a kit from Thonk, or is it Perfect Circuit, or wherever it is you get them from in the States, and make it. Just make it. And I found that thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, I've got at least half a dozen or so modules in my rack now, which are all ones that I made myself. I didn't make them myself in as much as I fabricated them, but I got the kit and I soldered the damn thing together, and they all seem to work, remarkably so.
Was your rack your first? Was your rack, these modules, were they your first attempt at DIY soldering, or had you done this previously?
I have an O level in electronics. An O level was an exam you took when you were 16, so that was 30 years ago. I did some soldering 30 plus years ago. So yeah, no, it was something I had done.
Okay.
Oh no, actually no, I did a little bit also at university. Yeah, no, scratch that. Oh no, oh yeah. At university, right? I did because I did music technology at university, which you think, okay, great, music technology. I majored in Baroque flute building, so it's slightly different music technology than what most people see music technology as. So I did instrument building. I did Chinese folk music. I was a big folk head at the time. I had danced the Morris at that point. So yeah, I was deeply into folk music, and I was building flutes. But then I decided I bolted on a bit of electronics into the side of that, and I made for my final project a pitch to MIDI converter, which I attached to one of these wooden flutes that I'd made, and was able to play a Korg M1. I mean, this was back in the early 90s when I was at university. And so I did design a little circuit for that. I didn't design it. I stole it out of Electronics Weekly or wherever it was that I found it. But, I stuck my name on it, that kind of thing. Got the lab technician to print it out. And so I did do a little bit of soldering with that. So I do have some electronics background, I suppose. But it's long time ago. So I didn't come to it completely fresh, I suppose. But
so I saw you're tackling a Deckard Stream right now, which is not a small project.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of crazy as well. I mean, I'd done half a dozen DIY projects by the time Black Corporation got in touch, and it was, I don't know what I was thinking. So yeah, no, so I could solder. I think I could solder. So I haven't done a bad job of it, but I hope that I've put forward the idea that anyone could give it a go. That you don't have to be awesome at these things. You don't have to understand what the resistor bands do or what they're about, because most of the instructions are clear enough for you to just follow them, put them around the right way, and it should more or less work. I mean, I still don't understand the circuitry, but I've immensely enjoyed soldering these things together. Yeah, I mean, the Deckard Stream thing, I mean, I won't say I was tricked into it. I'll just say that I didn't realize what I was taking on, because they got in touch. Bob from Black Corporation got in touch and said, we'd love to send you the Decker's Dream kit. And I'm going, no way, that's going to be awesome. Decker's Dream kit. Because I'd written some nice things about it, up on Gear News and, Blade Runner, all that, CS80. Amazing. So yeah, well into that idea. And so he sent it through and it turned up and it was just the PCBs. I had no idea it was going to be just the PCBs. I was expecting the entire kit. I thought that'd be great. That'll take me an afternoon. But no, it's just the PCBs. So then I had to go on this entire journey of working out where you get components from and reading a bill of materials, getting on Mouser and putting in codes and going, I don't, is that what trying to get through descriptions on this material thing, does that mean that, is that one of these? So it turned into the kind of an epic journey, I think. But it's made for interesting videos. But ultimately I then had to buy, so I had to find the money to buy all the components. So there was me thinking I was going to get a $3,000 synth for free, when actually I got a grand's worth of PCBs, but I had to find the other $2,000 myself to buy all the bits for it. So that was a bit of a shock, but I got away with it, I think. And so I bought the whole rest of the kit from SynthCube. And I've got the motherboard done. I'm intending to do the front panel board either Friday or early next week. I need to get a day in there. And then I've got all the voice boards to do. So yeah, it should come together. I mean, it might have been a year now, I think, since we first got it, but it took about 6 months to get the parts in, to get all that sorted out. So yeah, it's a huge project, but it's an enormous amount of fun. I can't quite believe how much fun it is doing that. I mean, people do that for a living, soldering stuff together. That must be great.
It's pretty good. I know I was in Tokyo a few months ago for a synth event, and I had the pleasure of hanging out at the Black Corporation World Headquarters and hanging out with Bob. And Bob offered me a Decker's Dream kit. And I said, Bob, I would love nothing more than to own a Decker's Dream, but there's no way I will ever have the time to put this kit together. I said, honestly, it would be a waste to have me take this. So unfortunately I didn't get one, but I did. We did work out a trade then, so I ended up with a Kajimi.
Oh yeah,
which is an absolutely magical instrument. I didn't really know too much about it. I played with it while I was there, and I'm like, okay. And then I got home, and a couple weeks later, one showed up on my doorstep. It's just the stuff those guys make is just fantastic. Really, really interesting stuff. Really, really smart designs and really nice people. It was the strangest conversation I think I've ever had. I was sitting there late one night, and we were all sort of sitting in a circle in their place in Tokyo, and we were having a conversation that was happening simultaneously in English, Japanese, and Russian. And most people knew one of those languages. And so it just kind of worked, and it kind of kept going around this circle. And I was like, this is the most fun I think I've ever had.
Yeah.
But the Decker's Dream, it's a really special instrument. And I think what those guys are trying to achieve with doing those types of synths that nobody else are really tackling, I think is very cool. And the angle coming, leaving Eurorack and then starting Black Corporation with the idea that we're going to do these beautiful polysynths. I think the world needs more of that stuff. Because Roman, who is the guy behind Black Corporation, he had done Sputnik Modular, in the past, and now he's doing this stuff. And I think, boy, what a smart guy and a really good group of people. So that's my plug for Black Corporation today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to. Well, first of all, for it to work when I finished it, that would be extraordinary. I think it has its challenges because, it was their first product. And I think the documentation isn't that great as far as building it goes, but there's a fantastic community of builders on Facebook. Some of them have built them for other people, so have built dozens of these things and have built them on behalf of other people. So they really know what they're doing, and they're incredibly supportive and helpful. Even trying to navigate through the engineering sort of language, because this is a whole nother level of electrical knowledge and stuff when it comes down to circuit design and what things should be used. And they can argue over what value of diode that should be in a particular place, And I just asked a simple question and it ends up in this huge debate about something or other. And I'll just go with the one I've got, I don't know what the answer is. If I get it round the right way, I think I'm on a winner, So, but it's great that these communities emerge over these products. It's quite fascinating. But I think that's also actually part of what makes Eurorack work, is the fact that the level of support you get from the community is huge, that you wouldn't have had when they first started out back in the 90s, early internet days. It would have been impossible. I think you would have felt very much on your own trying to work all that out, whereas that's just not the case these days. There's an immense amount of help out there, whether it's video tutorials or people, and everyone talks to you, well, mostly. You can get some short replies in places, as inevitably, because people are asking the same questions over and over again, but largely on the whole, it's a happy place.
I feel like it, because it is such a small sort of little niche area within synthesis itself. The people that are doing it are excited to do it. And they're, I know I certainly am. I'm always excited anytime I have an opportunity to talk to anybody about Eurorack, whether they're asking me a question or we're just having a conversation about our favorite oscillators. I always jump to the opportunity because it's my passion, and to meet someone else that has a similar passion, I just get excited, because my wife certainly doesn't want to sit and talk about Eurorack oscillators all night long. So anytime someone reaches out, it's always really nice, whether it's in the context of Pittsburgh Modular or whether it's just, hey, let's talk about this thing that I like. I think it's very, very cool. And I think most of the community, everyone I met, has certainly felt that way, because you don't get into modular synthesis to make $1 million or to sell 1 million records, because it's niche, and it's in the music you make typically is sort of a little quirky and a little strange. And obviously everyone's a little different, but I think people that do this stuff are in it because they're passionate about making sounds, or passionate about the idea of modular synthesis. And that's what gets me excited.
Yeah. It's like learning to play the banjo, I think. It's a personal thing. Nobody else really wants to hear it. And that's very much like modular. You're learning your own instrument. Nobody's really interested in hearing it, but it doesn't diminish the fascination and enjoyment that you get out of it, because it's different. It's different to, you're slaving away on your computer trying to produce a track. You want to produce a track that then someone's going to take on somehow, that will then get sung on by someone, and then you'll be huge. That's the natural way things work, isn't it? On being a producer, you don't feel that. I don't feel that on modular at all. There's no pull to stardom. Sure, I'd love to release some decent records, and I certainly buy since getting into this this world. Since I think that before I got my before Eurorack record collection, which is all kind of grunge and folk and, songwriters and, big anthems, things like that. And then going all the way back to before I discovered pop music, I was very much into Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre and Sky and stuff like that. Oddly, War of the Worlds was something that I grew up on, what am I talking about? So when I get to the other end, and I'm now starting to buy and appreciate electronic music, which again, oddly, I didn't really have much of an appreciation for when I started getting into Eurorack. I wasn't listening intently to electronic music. I'd bypassed most of the 90s dance music by going headfirst into folk. I've been fascinated by old songs about fisherwomen and towns up in Yorkshire and things like that. So I didn't. It's not as if it was a musical journey in a sense of, I need to make the sort of music that I love. It was not that at all. It was a fascination with the strange sounds that were coming out of these machines that pinged, I guess, nostalgic ideas about old Vangelis records and old things I used to listen to, as well as just the interest of that interaction. So yeah, I just thought, I guess I'm trying to say that you don't need to have a passion for electronic music to have a passion for modular. Whereas now that's growing in me, that's growing out into, I can now access music that I wouldn't have accessed before, and starting to enjoy stuff like that. But it's not a driving force, is not to release a whole load of modular music myself. It's something which is a possibility, and I like the idea of that, and every now and again I will think about that. But it's not the driving force. It's not why I sit down and play on it. I sit down and play on it because it sounds really excellent. And look, if I just move that filter, there's an interview with Wolfgang, PPG guy recently.
Okay, yeah.
He cashed in his chips for Ramboss or whatever it was, who bought in Plugin Alliance, blah blah blah. Anyway, I was really fascinated by something that he said, which was that all anybody ever seems to do in synthesis is just turn the cutoff knob. And I thought, yeah, he's right. Because it's excellent. Because it sounds amazing. Listen to that. I mean, I don't even need a modular. I can do it with my mouth. And it just sounds excellent every time. And although I understand, tons of respect to the man and his wavetables, wavetables don't excite me in the same way that a filter sweep on a square wave or a triangle wave does. It excites me every time, and I get a kick out of it every time. Whereas I can't say that about wavetables, I'm afraid. That's just my thing.
And that's interesting. I like it. I think we've been at this now for nearly an hour and a half, and I think this is a good spot to thank you for joining us. And by us, I mean me in my dining room and my cat who's wandered through a few times while we've been talking. Thanks for joining me here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, a pleasure to meet you again.
Yeah.
Apologies. And if you're up for it, maybe we come on and chat again, because I think it's fascinating to talk about this stuff and sort of all the different angles. There's a million different, every time you were talking, I was running a million different topics through my head of, we could go this way. This is interesting because I really do find this stuff really interesting in how people approach synthesis, why they approach it, and sort of what their brain uses it for. Because I have, the way for what modular means to me is very special and very important to me. But as I learned, everyone has their own story and their own way of why this is interesting to them. But I appreciate you spending an hour and a half with me trying to explain your story. And I found it really interesting. And I'm going to keep watching your streams. And I guess all I'm trying to say is thank you very much for hanging out tonight.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I mean, as you've discovered, I could talk. I just talk, and then I just keep talking, and then they talk some more. So, I hope something interesting came out of that. But it's been a total delight, mate. That's been super. What a lovely way to spend an evening.
Well, cool. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody in the live chat. I know we haven't mentioned you guys. We've been talking so much, but I've been reading all the comments, and it's been interesting to watch you guys follow along. Thank you guys for all hanging out with us tonight. And coming up, I have Paul Soulsby said he would stop by, so hopefully we can get Paul Soulsby to come on and tell us about what he's been up to. I haven't seen him since Super Booth last year. We had a long conversation one night about sketch comedy, so maybe we'll have a long conversation about what he's up to, and then just dive into sketch comedy, because I know he's a big fan of sketch comedy. And I've got some other people in these semi-planning stages that you may be surprised when they show up. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. And if you guys have any ideas in the live chat of someone I may know that, I can invite up, please send it my way. And Robin, once again, thank you very much. I'm going to end the stream now, and I will see you guys later. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much.
Cheerio.
Bye.